Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our first technical webinar of 2014, at least the first one for the partner program. I'm Ogi Shopov from the Sitefinity partner program, and with me I have Greg Karanikov, who's one of our senior solutions consultants.
Hey everybody, I'm pleased to be with you.
And today Greg will talk about continuous delivery with Sitefinity CMS. It's a very exciting topic, and from what I hear, it's a rather lengthy one, so I'll do my best to make the introduction as short as possible. There are a couple of things that I wanted to say before we start, a couple of things that the product team actually asked me to mention. Probably a lot of you already know that on the product feedback forum in the Sitefinity Partner Extranet, we shared a preview of the roadmap for the upcoming release Sitefinity 7.0. There's some good discussions going on in there, and I've been told that within days we will publish the official roadmap as well. So please join us in those discussions. Log into the Partner Extranet. If you don't have an account, if you don't know how to get to that forum, contact your account manager and they will help you with that. But this is really the one forum that you can get in touch with representatives of our product team, senior developers and engineers, and you can do it without all the distractions of the public forums. So feel free to join in. And I think that's about it. I think that we are basically ready to start with today's topic of continuous delivery with Sitefinity. And Greg, before we start, what do you think? Is it continuous or continual delivery?
All right, I think very few developers have ever had that conversation before. I think the correct one grammatically is continual, but still, as continuous is a convention that's accepted by most of the developers out there, I think we'll just leave it to that and we'll use that term.
So here's a little request from me. If after watching this webinar you have no questions about the material that we show you, but you still want to send us some feedback and you're pretty good at English, let us know what you think. Is it continuous or continual?
Right. Hopefully that won't be the most exciting question for the day. All right, guys, so let's get started with, we have quite a lengthy agenda for today, and this is what we're going to go through. So we're going to go through the essence of continuous delivery. We're going to define the different terms that continuous delivery encompasses, the goals of the continuous delivery, and what exactly what does it mean to have continuous development, continuous integration, continuous deployment, how those differ and what those really are. We're going to go through the different stages of continuous delivery and the environments of the delivery pipeline. Now there's something that I need to share right off the start. Actually, I tortured our own developers and administrator teams quite a lot for this topic because I have tried to get best practices that we have come across during our whole experience, meaning like over 12 years of development, delivery, and the whole infrastructure that accompanies all that whole process. So what I'm going to share with you is, you know that we recently delivered a new version of Telerik.com. That is a huge website, over 900,000 pages, countless articles, content items, and images, and so on and so forth. It is integrated with only a gazillion external systems, and delivering that project was quite heroic effort. But still, we managed to do this, and we streamlined our development process. So we now deliver that in a continuous way. So I'm going to share some details that our own developers use, and well, you can use that experience. You can take as much of it as you think would fit your own development and design scenarios, and from that we can sparkle some more discussions. And we can get some more ideas of what could be done. Now, continuous delivery includes source control. So we are going to go into some specifics about how Sitefinity plugs into source control, what setup options and recommendations you have in front of you. We'll also talk about different tools for provisioning of the Sitefinity web application, because continuous delivery means that we have to deliver and to pass a Sitefinity installation from one environment to another. We're going to talk about the different options that you have and what other tools would be useful for that purpose. We're going to go to talk about different deployment scenarios. This is probably not exactly related to the continuous delivery, but we have been asked quite a lot about how do you actually deploy without any loss of, without any downtime or without any data loss in scenarios such as NLB. So we're going to talk about that. And one important thing, maybe things that you haven't been aware about in terms of SiteSync, how you can use the SiteSync functionality within Sitefinity to establish continuous delivery. Okay. We have, and that's a good sign actually. We already have our first questions, which means that you guys probably can hear me well. Now this probably was something that I should have started off with. You can hear me well and you see the agenda slide on your screens, right? I'm hoping for some quick positive answers. Okay, excellent. Thank you, guys. And Joachim, yeah, we probably will create a white paper on it. We have some things yet to polish because maybe I will shed some light over some things that are still cooking in the kitchen that might be additional bonuses for you guys. But this will be somewhat during the demo itself. All right. So let's start with some terms. What do you mean with continuous delivery? Now, of course, that whole slide deck will be provided, so don't rush to take down any notes or to screenshot that whole page. We're going to provide that to you. Now, continuous delivery is the automated process that accelerates the release of software and digital services. It allows you to release a new service, a better web page, a bug fix, or a special offer rapidly and with minimum manual intervention. As it becomes possible to make more frequent small changes, which are far less risky than a few large ones, you get dramatically faster and more focused feedback about what works and what doesn't. Continuous delivery works best when operations teams and software developers are part of the same agile process. Now I'm going to elaborate on that a bit more. I'm going to show you exactly what that means, so stay put. Now the continuous delivery pipeline that I just mentioned is a deployment pipeline. It actually is a set of validations through which a piece of software must pass on its way to the release. In real world, this is done by breaking up your builds into stages. Each stage provides increasing confidence, usually at the cost of extra time. Early stages can find most problems, yielding faster feedback, while larger stages provide slower and more thorough probing. Deployment pipelines are a central part of continuous delivery. We're going to explain and elaborate on that a bit more in the next next few minutes. Okay. Now the continuous deployment. That's that is a process that ensures that every change goes through the pipeline and automatically gets put into production, resulting in many production deployments every day. Now there is a note that I should make here. In order to do continuous deployment, you must be doing continuous delivery. The difference with continuous delivery is that continuous delivery, with it you are able to do frequent deployments but may choose not to do it, usually due to business preferring a slower rate of deployment. And the environment, of course, as we all know, that's a set of processes and programming tools used to create and test the software product. Like, for example, virtual machines with pre-configured IaaSs, SQL Server environments, and so on. Now, at any point, feel free, if something is not clear, if something is not, if you have any additional questions, feel free to post them in those in that questions box that you have in the GoToMeeting. I'm pretty sure you're all used to that already, so we'll just move ahead. Now, what are the goals of continuous delivery? The goals are several. You have to automate deployment and configuration of environments. That's a guarantee. That is a guarantee of the state of the environment, so it ensures low volatility. You have to use environments by means of isolation and sanity of the delivered software and its testing process. That also automates testing procedures in environments. It also improves the agility and speed of delivery, and that's the main objective here. We have to use data-driven automation at scale to allow ease of reuse and flexibility to accommodate multiple departments, environments, and product lines. And we leverage common application processes, process best practices such as versioning and promotion of infrastructure policies to easily accommodate complex change windows, repeatability, and improved SLAs. No longer will be overwhelmed by the management of infrastructure and applications separately because they are intrinsically dependent, and we leverage the same process for ensuring full lifecycle management and full stock state changes. Now, let's go through how exactly that works. Now, the essence of continuous delivery, that is basically implementing new functionalities in small steps that don't change drastically your data model and therefore don't crash your web app. This is how ideally that's done. So let's say you have a Sitefinity web project and you are creating a new custom module that you are developing in your Visual Studio that uses maybe another database or a table that you have added to the default Sitefinity database. Okay, let's say this is our table. It contains a field with goods, a column with titles, summary, and an address. Okay, so this was the initial module that you built. You had a developer that created that table alongside with your module, but for some reason you like to just rename that last column that says address. You need to rename it to URL because that makes more sense. Now, what is the continuous delivery way to do that? Typically, you won't just rename this because you'll probably make some breaking changes and that functionality, that module that apparently is on your live website, it will cease working. So you have to do this in steps. And the first step would be to create a script that would then be promoted to the different environments, such as testing, like when the environment in which you have user, like say unit tests, then you have integration tests, then you have UI tests and sanity tests, and then it goes to production. So you create that additional table and it passes through those different testing environments. If all tests are passed with green light, so you have a successful result of the tests, you have that additional column created on the production environment ultimately. Next, the next step is again to create another script that would, for example, copy all the content of the address column to the one that we just created. Of course, if you're sure about it, you can just go through a couple of tests, not through all environments, then be promoted to the live environment, to your production server, and then you'll have duplicate entries in those two columns. No breaking changes here. Those operations will not crash your website, will not disturb the way that module that you initially created works. Then the next step is, after you create a functionality that would remap all the different elements of your web project that use that column, to start using the URL column instead, and you have tested that, again, that passes through all your testing environments, then the last step is for you to delete that column that we had to rename first, so that you get that end result. So you pass through all those steps, and those are steps through which you test, you make sure that the production environment is live and its operation does not get interrupted, and at the end you have that end result. that address column was renamed to URL, and that did not interrupt the working, the operation of your end project. Now, of course, this is a scenario that would probably assume that you are working on a project continuously, meaning that you have, for example, a client, or you're working on your own big project that requires your continuous maintenance, and that requires you to create additional step or additional set of environments, unit tests, user UI tests, and so on. That could be a lengthy process. For some cases, we have a really useful tool. We have included that in the SDK. That's our testing framework, which can save some of your effort and time, and you can use that for some of those tests that we have in mind here. And by the way, I'm speaking of tests all the time, so we'll focus on these right away. We'll go through the different stages that the continuous delivery includes. Now, typically in continuous delivery, you have different stages. The first one is, of course, when you have a team of developers that work on your project, and then they use version control. So they use some sort of version control like Git or TFS or any other tool for that matter to store different versions of the code that they develop, and a tool that is able to for example, provides conflict resolution and so on. They can use any branch from it to restore from a previous version of your of that project, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is the first stage of the whole pipeline. Next, continuous integration is triggered when a check-in occurs. This means that every time someone commits a change, it triggers a build and automated build verification tests. So the whole continuous delivery ends when the change goes to the production environment. And in between, a lot can happen. After a successful build, other tests can run, such as functional tests and performance tests. Those are the quality gates. Now, another note that I should make here is that every stage relays feedback to the team. Fast feedback is an important part of the continuous delivery. If a stage fails, someone needs to know right away, because the pipeline stops until the problem is fixed. All right, let's move on to the next step, and that's the environment. Now, as you can see here, though, we have separated the environments in terms of responsibilities, and we'll talk about each one of these separately. Now, those two are the environments where the developers have their own developer machines, and they have, like, let's say, a centralized source control server where they commit the changes to. Okay, the code into the continuous integration, or CI is, as we have named it in this case, environment, is where the developers test code and check whether the applications run successfully with that code. Once the application has been tested and the developers feel that the code is working fine, the application then moves to the next stage. And there are a few rules and recommendations that describe this environment. So all external dependencies to the test's functionality are mocked. So there are no really working additional dependencies. All providers in Sitefinity are mocked, and so on. So this environment contains unit tests that ensure that the code is valid, that there are no problems with that code to be built, and the algorithm and the logic is basically correct. You do not test against how that code would actually work in a real environment. So deployments are not done in those environments, therefore. Okay. The environments are used for proper representation of the state of the software and the testing of the context of the continuous delivery pipeline. Now the continuous integration environment state should be reported by the testing framework to all subscribers, which means that any unit tests that fail here should be reported straight away to the developers that are related to those functionalities that were created and tested here. All testing in the ideal case is automatic and be considered unit testing and functional testing of the features or modules that have been produced. So whenever we're ready, we push those features that we have developed here to the next environment. And again, in the ideal case, that would happen automatically. Now the system testing environment is, this is where the application is tested to check for reliability and to make sure that it does not fail on the actual production server. The application then moves to the system integration test environment. There are a few rules and recommendations that describe the system testing environment that I've put here. All third-party dependencies to outside of the team are mocked, and actually you have deployments in this environment. What that means is that if you have external dependencies, like you have Sitefinity working with maybe payment providers, maybe some external CRM systems, you have some integrations with other third-party modules and components which have their own APIs, and their own development procedures and development windows and so on. Those are all mocked so that they do not interfere with the tests. You don't want to cause some changes over there. You don't want to test anything that would cause any changes to those external databases that you might be working with here. That's why they are mocked. Okay, so, and as I said, deployments are done in these environments. That means that you have to have Sitefinity installed here. You have to have an IS server. You have to have a SQL server, or the database could be mocked if your modules or whatever you're testing here will work in this environment. But the test should also cover scenarios where that system that is being tested works with other systems within Sitefinity. So within your team. System testing environment state should be reported by the testing framework to all its subscribers, and all testing should be automatic and can be considered functional, load, and stress tests of the whole system. Now, one thing to add in this environment, network load balancing can be avoided and not implemented here. This really depends if you consider NLB to be external to the system that is being tested or an intrinsic part of it. Okay, and then we move to the test group sign-off. So the stage, this is the stage where everything that the developers have created is being passed on to the QAs. Now the system integration testing environment, this is where the tests are more, maybe they're more expensive than testing on these environments here. That is why it's important for you to have those separate environments, because it is cheaper, meaning that it takes less time to find bugs on those environments than just dump everything on this stage here, because in this case, you have your system working with multiple other ones, and if something fails, you have to dig really deeply. You have to probe quite deeply into the system to find where really the problem is. Okay. So this environment is made to look exactly like the production server environment. Here the testing process verifies applications coexisting with other systems and with multiple integrated systems, assuming that with each one you assume that each external system that you also test with, it has already passed system testing. So following this, the applications are passed to the user acceptance tests here. There are a few rules and recommendations that describe this environment. So here, all systems are real. There are no mockups. Possible scenarios that would deploy systems only relevant to the development roadmap and integrate production-ready systems from outside. Deployments are done in this environment, and the system integrations test environment state should be reported by the testing framework. And we probably expect to have multiple testing frameworks and suites in this case, and that's being reported to all subscribers. And again, ideally testing is automatic and be considered functional load stress tests of the whole system. The promotion to the next environment needs approval. So before everything goes to the user acceptance test, everything needs to be approved. And Joachim, I can see that you have a question. I'll just finish with that slide and I'll address that right away. User acceptance tests environment, testing environment that you see right here is where the user stories are tested whether they pass their acceptance criteria. Acceptance tests or criteria are usually created by business customers. These are high-level tests to verify the completeness of a user story or stories played during any sprint or iteration. These tests are created ideally through collaboration between business customers, business analysts, testers, and developers. It's essential that these tests include both business logic tests as well as UI validation elements. The business customers, or the product owners, they are the primary project stakeholder of those tests. As the user stories pass their acceptance criteria, the business owners can be reassured the developers are progressing in the right direction. The application then moves to the production environment. And in general, this is where you can create different both automatic and manual tests. So here all systems are real. There are no mockups. Again, a possible scenario is that you can deploy systems that are only relevant to the development roadmap and integrate production-ready systems from outside. You have to have real deployments in this scenario, and user acceptance testing environment state should be reported again by the testing framework to all subscribers. Testing is both automatic and manual and includes acceptance UI testing of the whole system. You can actually play different use case scenarios, and if you can automate this, that would be perfect. If not, I guess you would have a human input in this. Some ways to create use case scenarios is to automate this would be, for example, I know that Test Studio has that kind of functionality where you can manually click on different buttons, fill out forms with different entries, and require a specific result. You can actually create and record such a test with Test Studio. Of course, you are not forced to use that. I'm just giving that as one option. However, of course, if the user acceptance test environment includes tests such as do the pages look or do the functionalities that we just developed look as the business users imagine those, of course they can hardly be automated. So this is where QAs and user input has to be used. And of course, the promotion to the next environment needs approval. So whenever you're ready, somebody has to take the responsibility and to say, okay, we are ready to push to production because that is your live environment. And once the application approval is done and it was promoted successfully through the other environments, the application then becomes live. Again, a notice here that you can add or remove some environments or stages without totally compromising all the goals, but pretty much this is the perfect setup that we have established throughout our experience. You can adapt any part of it. You can take whatever you see to fit in your specific scenarios. Now, a couple of words here. We have used, and I have included some useful links at the end of this presentation, You can, whenever we send the slide decks, you will have access to these. For automation of the creation of those different environments, in our own teams we have used Puppet, there's an open source framework. There is a commercial product as well that is being provided by Puppet's owners, but we have used the open source framework and we have built our own scenarios based on these, which automatically install all the required software and functionality on the servers, like IAS, configure the application pools, configure the permissions and so on, install SQL servers, and then those environments are ready to accept your package Sitefinity. Now, as for deploying and pushing Sitefinity from one instance to another, there are multiple ways. I will be talking about web deploy in a couple of minutes. We have done this using PowerShell scripts mostly, and we have spent quite a lot of time on this, but maybe I will be able to dig some more specifics and provide those to you at some later point. Now, Johan starts that if you start talking about stress and load testing and full functional testing, at which point do you start including, say, client-side JavaScript tests now that client-side becomes a trend? Let's see, maybe it really depends on the functionality that you are creating, Johan, meaning that some JavaScript testing, some JavaScript tests can run both here. Maybe it would make sense to include them when the system is working not exactly in isolation, where you have a real deployment of the project. So this environment, let's see. Yeah, the system testing environment may be the right stage to do this. Of course, it depends what the module and what the functionality is all about, because at some point you might also have tests here in the user acceptance tests, because depending on what the JavaScript really does.
Right, if it's JavaScript that is actually fetching data, that will probably make a big difference on which stage you would test it. Wouldn't you say, Greg?
Absolutely. In that case, the system integration test environment would be the one to test it on, because this is where you actually have the system running in conjunction with other external tools. And if the JavaScript really is fetching data from outside, this is the environment where that happens.
So, Greg, this is a representation of the pipeline of environments that is set up here at Telerik, and these are all the steps that we go through when we are deploying changes on Sitefinity.com as well as Telerik.com. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So, but the same principles and the same tools would apply even if the environments were slightly different than what we're seeing here, because I think that this list of environments would be a bit extreme to some companies. And if you're working with less environments, though, you can still apply the same techniques.
Absolutely. You can actually combine some tests. You can decrease the number of environments. For example, it really depends on the project, but you can combine here the system integration tests and the user acceptance tests. It really depends on the complexity of the project. It really depends, of course, on the budget, because setting those environments up is a lengthy process. So in some cases, basically you can combine those or you can eliminate those without still achieving the goals.
And speaking of budgets, maybe this is a good point to mention how friendly Sitefinity's licensing is to continuous deployments, because we don't charge for non-public environments. You just need the same license that you would use on production. You can apply to every internal non-public environment.
Absolutely. And just another way to illustrate the whole delivery pipeline, and that also includes timing, this is what the process really looks like. So this is where the delivery team creates and commits some change to the code to the version control and your source control system, which automatically triggers the build. Now some build tests run over here, and also if everything is right, they get passed to the continuous integration environment. Now automated tests can run, and if you get a red light here, so something fails, you immediately get a feedback saying that you have to change it. Again, when the same process starts again and you have eliminated those problems and you actually get a positive response, again you get a report for that, and this environment automatically should get promoted to the next one. This is basically what the whole workflow is. You pass through each environment, promote the changes whenever you get positive result of your different tests, and hopefully, and the goal is for those changes to end on the production environment. And again, if you make those changes in small steps so that they don't break the whole website, it's most likely for that whole process to work fluently. Now we're talking about the release process, and we're going to also talk about that. Okay. So the applying the release rules. Environment is considered operation if all configuration and deployment procedures required are 100% automated. And environments are always versioned. The tested applications and the respective tests are under version control. So it's a good idea when you have one project created, create as many tests as possible that would cover basic scope of functionalities that you might reuse on a later stage. This is exactly what we've done in the SDK, and I would urge you to use what we have built over there. Well, and as for the environments, they, in the ideal case, they should be short-living. They should only be used long enough to run through a suite of tests as the software moves through a delivery pipeline on the way to production. However, you can also practice an optimization strategy where machines inside the environment that are not completely destroyed by the virtualization layer, but just turned off. Since those machines are stateless, by doing so, you pay the price for creating the virtual machines only once, and from there on, only configurations would take place to clean those instances. A side effect of this, and a positive side effect, is that you can have predefined environments which would keep their host names, IPs, canonical names, machine groups, and so on, which increases the predictability and becomes subject of versioning on its own. And by the way, this could be some sort of an ideal scenario, and so because it is expensive to have machine provisioning from scratch, especially in the testing domain. Okay, so we covered the essence of continuous delivery. I gave you some information about the different stages that a process like the one that we have acquired here in Telerik works. And again, with a comment that you are free to modify the whole process, and you are free to take whatever you you think would fit into your own development environment. Okay, and with this, I think we are ready to focus, as we have in the agenda, on the source control. Okay, so we have been asked for recommendations, or with the general question, does Sitefinity support source control? And of course it does. I mean, there is hardly a developer that is working continuously on a project without source controlling his project and without keeping different versions of it in case you need to roll back, or at least something just gets messed up and you'd like to roll back. Now we're going to talk about different setup options and recommendations that our own developer team suggests. Now, first of all, of course, a good approach is to add any custom code, any widgets or modules that you create and so on, within separate version control projects in the Sitefinity solution. It's not a good practice to add something to the Sitefinity web app project itself, because that means that if you make a change, you'll have to reset the application on the production environment. In some cases, you can just create, just additional widgets and that could be automatically registered within the Sitefinity toolbox. And I think Peter Marinoff, another one of the senior sales engineers here at Telerik, has created a really useful blog post on that. And you'll get the link at the end of this presentation. So that can happen without you having to reset the project, or moreover, you don't have to rebuild the application and upload any files apart from the DLLs. Always check in any custom code. And the third one is a bit tricky. Now, a recommendation here is that you version all configuration files. However, now with Git, you won't have problems. It will work seamlessly. TFS has that nasty habit of locking and setting read-only attributes for anything that's being checked in. Now, what is the solution for that? There are several. One of those is you can have MS build scripts that could include after build scripts, which would automatically check out the configuration folder. And what I mean is, let me just bring my Visual Studio over. As you know, all configurations in Sitefinity are stored here in this configuration folder. If you check in that folder, which is something that you should do at first, all those different config files will be locked. And Sitefinity requires those config files, and it makes changes. For example, when you're adding new custom fields, when you're adding or making some modifications to the settings in the backend, those config files are changed. And if Sitefinity does not get access to that and those, you will get an error. So either you have to manually check out those configuration files, or you can create after build scripts which would do that automatically. They can get executed at the end of the MS build scripts that would build your project and promote those to the different environments. Any new configuration files that get executed, that gets created afterwards. For example, when you create your own module and you create a new that creates a new configuration file, you most probably have to add that to source control manually, or you might need to create a script that compares the contents of the configurations folder that you see here, that you have checked in, with the physical folder that you have. And yeah, of course, John adds that MVC widgets cannot be registered in a separate project since the controller has to be in the Sitefinity web app. John, this is something that we are currently working on. I've been reassured that we will have dramatic changes over our MVC story for Sitefinity 7.0. I'm glad you like it. Richard asks, what's a good way to ensure that new config files get added to the project with TFS source control? Well, that's something that some of our developers deal exactly with that kind of problems recommend. You can create a script that compares the contents of the checked-in configurations folder with the physical folder. And if there are any files that are added afterwards, they could be automatically checked in. That is something that, again, I have provided some links, but those are links to some basic tutorials. For anybody that is interested in that, we can continue the discussion, and I can further research on what our teams have done and how you can implement that. Okay, Jack Ferreira is asking why did you go for the XML approach instead of the configuration table? If you could please elaborate on that, please let me know. So I'm not exactly, just elaborate on the question. I'm not exactly sure what this is referring to.
I mean, I guess he's asking why are we not storing the configuration in the database. I think that's my guess.
Yeah, well, that is an approach that would solve that problem. I mean, if you are running in network load balanced environments, or maybe in Azure, that would be the approach, and that would solve that problem.
So it is an option. It can be
absolutely
set up that way. Okay.
And that's a good remark right there, Jack. I'm just giving options when the config files are physical, but the option to move the configuration files in the database, that will solve that problem right out of the back. Okay. Now, I get asked a couple of times, what about the database? Do you version the database? Well, there are several things that I would not recommend you to version. The database is one of those things, and the reason for that is that it's a code-first database. So the schema typically is part of the DLLs that are in Sitefinity. So any functionality that is being created through the UI of Sitefinity, it carries the database schema that is automatically created by the code. So in that case, what I would recommend is do backups of the database before any major change that you do, any change that might break it. But as for versioning, I wouldn't recommend this. When you're developing a Sitefinity project, you are, for example, creating a custom widget or a custom module that carries some business critical information, like, for example, customer information, purchases, credit card data, and so on, any kind of orders, anything like that. What I would recommend you to do is have either a separate database which would carry that information and which you would version, or if you add that information in the Sitefinity database as a new table, you can create a script that would, for example, a schema or a data script that would be able to be used to recreate those tables. In that case, you can add those scripts, or you can add the whole external database in Visual Studio as database projects, and that means that you will be able to version control them. Another thing that I would not recommend you to do is to version control the DLLs. That would just increase the size of your source control server. And what we have done here internally is we have added our own DLLs to okay, no, it just escaped my mind. So yeah, we are storing those as packages which can be pulled really quickly. Exactly. Thanks, Jack. So we have created NuGet packages with all different versions of the Sitefinity DLLs, and when we need to restore a specific version of those, we just use those packages. Now, there was an idea that we might do you guys good by sharing those, and I'll see what I can do about it. But if in any case, you could do the same. You can create NuGet packages if you get to do that operation regularly. You don't want to use your space on the source control server for that. All right. Okay, and let's talk a bit about the different tools for provisioning. Now, typically, one way to push content from one environment to another, one way that is already working in conjunction with source control and so on, is the web deploy. Now, web deploy in some cases is a method that can also work when you have a smaller project that you'd like to push to a target environment, and you probably all have used it at some point. It's really easy to set up and it's really easy to maintain. Is that publish method here, and through Visual Studio you can easily create a new profile and then you can add some more configurations to it to automate how your project can be pushed from one environment to the other. You have all sorts of options. Basically, you have different publishing methods. The web deploy is probably, and the web deploy package is the most powerful one of those because it can also wrap up your database, make any changes to the web config file, and so on. You just have to specify the remote server, the destination URL. Let's see if I will be able to do this right here. Oops, ow. Oops. Let me do that again, and so my server is localhost, site name is this one. All right. So here you have the ability to perform some automations, like you can depending on the configuration in which you will be releasing, you will be publishing your project, you can have automatic web config transformations. And I think Exactly Yonkers has some really useful blog posts about some improvements in terms of performance and caching using web config transformations. You can also package different databases and ship them along with your product, with your project, and push them to an environment. One of the things about web deploy is that you can configure TFS to automatically publish and deploy projects to a destination environment using web deploy. For some smaller cases, of course, you can use the site's the code sync tool of Sitefinity. Now, that is something that actually we have seen to be used in really really interesting scenarios. For example, companies that do not have source control, or products and projects that are internal and do not need versioning, they're not so critical and so on, or for faster means of pushing content from one environment to the other, where you don't want to mess with checking in any code into source control, you can use the code sync tool. It's really easy. What it does is you can configure your local environment to have a folder where a copy of any parts of a Sitefinity project could be shared, and you can download it locally, make any changes, and whenever you're ready to push those changes back to the server, it would also go through conflict resolution. So if somebody has made some changes in the meantime to the same file that you were working with, those changes would be resolved. Of course, one recommendation, if you were working on a critical, maybe a critical project, always add that to source control. And I think we have one topic yet to cover. Actually, a couple more. Hopefully we will have enough time for these, as the different deployment scenarios. I'll go through the first one really quickly. I mean, I will not spend too much time on it whatsoever. The manual deployment scenario, that pretty much is something that happens when you first deploy a project. You just take all the files, and just move them to your production environment, make a backup of your database, then attach and restore it on the production environment and adjust the data connection string. This is pretty much what happens the first time when you deploy a project of Sitefinity. In some cases, we have seen developers do that and replace their whole website using that when they perform upgrades and so on. But this is really the basic way for you to deploy Sitefinity. Now, in cases where you have a network load balance scenario, we have some approaches that probably we can share whenever we have that kind of architecture and we need to perform some changes to deploy maybe a new version of Sitefinity and so on. Now, this is a typical scenario. You have the network load balancer. Underneath that, you have two servers which are connected to a database. What happens when you need to upgrade that? So here is a typical approach. First of all, you can freeze all the content that on content deployment to this whole website, ensuring that no new information enters the database. Of course, we're talking about cases where this is beyond, this is not part of a continuous delivery process. You have some critical changes that would cause changes in the database schema and so on. So first of all, you need to freeze all new content that's being deployed to the website, and you replicate the database that stands underneath it. You change the data connection string in the data config file of server number 2 and connect it to that new database, that copy of the database. Then you need to detach server 1. We have to make changes to the system config file of this server to detach it from the NLB setup so that it no longer sends cache and validation calls to server number 1. At this point, server number 1 and 2 are serving the same website from completely independent setups. This is where you can just detach server number 1. Then, when you have that system not being exposed to the public, you can upgrade server number 1 by replacing its binaries, making necessary changes to config files, and consequently, the database schema that would get updated. At this point, integration and unit tests can also be run. And if all is well, the website is successfully updated, then at this point, you can attach this to the network load balancer, detach those two, then just create a copy of that server number 1, configure it, and connect it to the database so that you have that scenario again. Alright, that was really quickly going through the NLB scenario. And last but not least, SiteSync. That is a tool that most of our enterprise customers use to push content from, for example, a staging environment to the production. For example, you can have a copy of the user acceptance tests environment and you can have SiteSync run there, and then you can use that to push content to the production environment. Apart from that, though, in the context of continuous delivery, there are a couple more things that Sitefinity SiteSync does really well. Now, with dynamic, you can create new dynamic modules and widget templates which you can push from one environment to the other using SiteSync. In other cases, you would have to make changes to the database. You have to update different files. This is not the case with SiteSync. You can use that to push content, to push dynamic modules and widget templates in an uninterrupted manner from one instance to the other. Another thing that we're now working on is, that you can create and export dynamic modules as packages. Those are basically XML files that you can again plug into source control, and they would contain any changes to database schema and so on. That is another good thing for you to bear in mind when you're developing new custom dynamic modules. Okay, I know that we're on top of the hour, so those links will be provided to you in a subsequent follow-up. With which I'd like to thank you for your attention, and we have some questions that I will be happy to address.
I noticed there is a question by Mirko that just came in, and he was asking if there is a way to deploy page templates to a client's production environment if that production environment is locked down due to security concerns. And I think it really depends on how it's locked down. If it's locked down good enough, probably there is no way to do this unless you gain access to it. But Greg, do you think Thunder has any ability to do that, or
yeah, absolutely.
Sufficient?
Now Augie, you're pretty much correct. It depends on how it's being locked down. With Sitefinity Thunder, basically this is one of the really nice gems of Sitefinity Thunder is that's in the site sync and code sync. All the communication passes through port 80, so you don't have to have anything additional exposed, which means that you might be able to download or upload widget and page templates to a destination environment. With SiteSync, it's the same case. Everything passes through port 80, so if you go ahead and configure Sitefinity to share the website templates folder, you would have complete access to it using the CodeSync tool.
Speaking of that, we're actually very interested to find out how you are using SiteSync for those of you who have projects that are actually implementing SiteSync. And especially if you are having your own continuous delivery scenario. So if you have something to share on that front, if you can go to again to the partner extranet and the product feedback forums, and you can post it in there. Our product manager and some of the R&D guys would love to see that and probably start a discussion with you on it. Other than that, if there are any questions that we missed during this webinar, we have them logged, so we'll follow up in separate emails. We will provide you with the slide deck, and as Greg said, and this webinar is also recorded. We will publish it on the partner extranet if you want to go over it again. Greg, I want to thank you for this great presentation today. And we're looking to do another webinar in about a month. We're not sure exactly how it will be scheduled because as we're preparing for the upcoming release of Sitefinity 7.0, we may have to do a pre-release webinar at some time and just give you a preview of what's coming up. But we're definitely aiming to do at least one technical webinar per month. So stay tuned. We'll let you know. And thank you very much for attending today. Thank you for asking questions. And we'll see you soon.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for me too, and have a great one. Bye.